hair coming out of it. You look at it, and from the neck on up, it is an ape, but from the neck down, quite distinctively, a human female. You see virtually human trunk, breasts, genitalia, arms and hands, legs and feet, posture and gait, and pensive gaze. In fact, this babe has actually had modeling training. We can tell that because models know that if you point the toe, you extend the leg. And she's doing that. I mean, if you trim the hair off these legs, you could use them in a Hanes ad. Other than an ape head, the only thing about the body you're seeing here that might be the least bit questionable as being fully human are the arms are a little bit longer than you normally would expect to see. Otherwise, completely human. I've sat in the St. Louis Zoo and watched the teachers bring the little children through. And it's just amazing. You got these kids that can't spell or pronounce Australopithecus afarensis, who know nothing of the scientific evidence. Yet they look at this silly mannequin, which, by the way, is only about this tall, and they say, "Oh, look, Miss Ferguson, an ape man." And, of course, Miss Ferguson corrects them. This is an ape woman. It's even politically correct. You can't touch it. So that is the exhibit. Very powerful to communicate that man is a beast using art. Now, let's take a closer look. You know what she's doing, don't you? What is she doing? Thinking. In fact, we've even dug up the fossilized thought. We know what she's thinking. She's thinking, I don't have a thing to wear. Okay, so that part's not true, but the other things I'm telling you are true. And look at these hands. There's no question you can play piano or violin or type on a keyboard with those kind of hands and fingers. The thing that's incredible is at the time this exhibit was constructed, we had all the evidence we needed to know that this is not correct at all. It's a fabrication. I called it to the attention of the St. Louis Zoo, and in the St. Louis Compost-Dispatch, their newspaper, a Post-Dispatch, the zoo responded when I said, you know, we knew that this was not the way the original Lucy looked from the papers of Stearns and Foster, or Stern and Sussman rather than others. The museum came back with this comment. They said, well, we know it's not anatomically accurate, but it conveys the impression we wish to give, so we're not going to change it. That's it. That's science. Well, who are Stern and Sussman? What they did, these gentlemen, publishing American Journal of Physical Anthropology back in 1983, before this specimen was made, and this is a big paper, page 279 through 312, they looked at what we call the Hadar Australopithecines. These are the kinds of creatures that Lucy is supposedly, presumably the same species, and that's another whole issue. I would submit they really don't know what's the same species and what isn't. I could show you a male gorilla skull and a female gorilla skull, and if you did not know them from life, no one could talk fast enough to convince you they're the same species or even the same genera. Because in primates, we get a lot of what we call sexual dimorphism, where the male and the female are strikingly different, particularly in the skull. So who knows? I mean, a lot of these creatures may just be male and female that we're calling two different species, but let's play the game. If we take Lucy-type specimens and you look at the radius of curvature of the fingers, apes that have suspensory-adapted hands for grasping limbs have highly curved, long, highly curved fingers that just naturally fit the limbs. They have other specializations, too. The scapula, for example, where the humerus, the upper bone here, goes into the socket, that socket is tilted up to allow the arm to be up here in a more relaxed position. For us, when we lift our arm this far, we can't go any further without rotating our whole shoulder blade the rest of the way. And it's because all those muscles in the back are rotating the shoulder blade that it's wearisome to hold your arms up like this very long. But suspensory adapted apes have up-tilted glenoid fossas. That's the thing the shoulder fits into there, or the arm bone fits into. And Lucy has the up-tilted glenoid fossa. I mean, she is a suspensory adapted ape anatomically. But when they looked at the curvature of the fingers, this is Lucy, and this is human, and these are other living apes here. So Lucy is always the circles. And with the exception of this one odd outer layer here that's by itself, you see consistently that the fingers of Lucy are highly curved even by modern ape standards. You would never confuse these hands with human hands. And that's the conclusion of the authors. They said that the hands were surprisingly similar to what we see in the pygmy chimp or common chimp range. At Answers in Genesis, we're working now, actually it's one of my tasks there, we're making an exhibit that's going to be called the Anatomically Correct Lucy. And on one side, we're going to acquire or sort of duplicate a typical museum portrayal, secular museum portrayal of Lucy. I would love to get St. Louis's Lucy. And then in the middle, we'll have the skeleton, in other words, the actual data that we're working with. And then on the right, we'll have what we're going to call the anatomically correct Lucy. It will look like a chimp. It will be knuckle-walking. We'll probably throw a banana in, you know, the whole works. Now you say, wait a minute, knuckle-walking. You telling me Lucy was a knuckle-walker? There's no museum that shows her as a knuckle-walker. That would ruin everything. You'd never convince kids coming through in a science class if Lucy was down there being a knuckle-walker. Well, this paper was published in Nature in March of 23, mentioned in Science News. And they're talking about two organisms, this one and this one. This is Lucy here, basically Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis. And it said that these creatures had wrists capable of locking the hands in place during knuckle walking. You see, apes don't just walk on their hands. These kids in the classroom, I mean, if I were their teacher, they'd be walking on their knuckles, not on the palm of the hand. Walk on the knuckles, and if you walk on the knuckles, the wrist will collapse. It takes a lot of strength to support your weight on your knuckles. But apes can lock their wrists so that it doesn't require so much force to keep them straight. We don't walk on our knuckles, we walk on our legs no matter what the teacher of the grade school class says. And we have a locking device in our knee. There's a special muscle called a popliteus whose function is to put a couple degree turn between the femur and the tibia, and that sets a lock. So when you stand at attention and you do this, get those legs really straight, you can stand like this for quite a while without expending a lot of energy. But if somebody comes up behind you, ever have this happen? Give you a clip right behind the knees, down you go because they unset the lock. So we have that kind of lock. No ape has that. Apes that walk on their knuckles have locking wrists, and Lucy has locking wrists. So get her off that posture like this and get her down on her knuckles so we can see what she really looked like. Now here is what they portray as Lucy's feet. This is the most egregious misrepresentation in the whole Lucy thing. To this day, Lucy's feet are shown like this. They are virtually human in shape. They have ignored the bones that have been found of Australopithecus afarensis, showing that they couldn't have been looking like this at all. For example, going back to Stern and Sussman again. This is the toe bone. Look at the curvature compared to human. It's curved even by ape standards. These are apes. Here's how curved. These are apes. This is how curved Lucy is. So highly curved fingers and toes would not confuse either the hands or feet with a human. Now, it's interesting. The authors Stern and Sussman, their conclusion for hands and feet was this. There is no evidence that any existing primate has long, curved, heavily muscled hands and feet for any purpose other than to meet the demands of full or part-time tree-dwelling, arboreal life. So that was their conclusion. Now, Lucy to this day continues to be shown with human feet, even though we know better. For example, Discover magazine, back in 1996, and it's no different today, ignored the bones that could have been used to show what the feet look like and simply replaced the feet with human feet. Now, why? If we have bones that show the highly curved toes, why would you just ignore them and put human feet on afarensis or Lucy? I'm glad you asked. You see, here are the feet, and the article said, why did we ever get up on 2 feet? Okay. The reason they must put human feet on Lucy is because they adamantly insist that a creature like Lucy made those footprints that Mary Leakey found in Laetoli, Tanzania, about 800 or 900 miles away from where Lucy was found, by the way. And Mary Leakey found footprints. It was a trail 73 feet long. There were 20 larger footprints, the ones you see here, and it's left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, off into the distance. These are made in a volcanic ash. There are volcanoes in this area to this day that when they erupt, if it's raining at the time, the ash sort of sets up like plaster or cement. And so somebody must have been walking in wet volcanic ash, left these footprints behind. They were subsequently, and I would think very quickly, filled in with water-deposited sediment so that they've been preserved since they were made. Now, Mary Leakey and others believe that they are 4 million years old, which happens to be the current age of Lucy. And so Johansen insisted from the get-go when these were discovered that his Lucy made those footprints, or afarensis made those footprints. Now, in addition to the bigger individual, notice there's another set of footprints. Notice the stride for the big ones. This, 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 this. Look at the stride for the smaller ones. See how they had to increase the stride to keep up? So a smaller person was making bigger steps to keep up with the footprints of a larger person. And then this is neat. When Mary Leakey told me this, I had to get off the floor. She gave this lecture shortly after she found this at Washington University School of Medicine. Actually, it was in the main campus. And I heard the presentation. There's a third set of footprints up here. And you can look very carefully and you won't see them because there's the big set here and the small set here. Guess where the little set is? Each footprint, without missing a beat, is on top of the big footprints. And this little individual really had to do something like this to keep up. Now, when Mary mentioned this, you could see she was visibly embarrassed. First, she knows they weren't human. She knows there's some kind of an ape man. She's absolutely certain it wasn't Lucy because she knows Lucy doesn't have feet that could make this kind of a footprint. Johansen says Mary Leakey doesn't know very much about evolution, so the two have been in a big squabble over this. But today, most people like to think among evolutionists that a creature like Lucy made these footprints. But Mary talked about those little prints. She said, you know, it's interesting. Some tetrapods step in their own footprints, but she says this is clearly not a four-legged tetrapod. She says the Maasai, when they hunt, step in one another's footprints to keep the noise down. And then she was sort of embarrassed, and she said, and of course, little children just love to step in their elders' footprints in the snow and the mud and what have you. This is what one of those prints looked like when they were still fresh. By the way, they're supposed to be 4 million years old, but in the years since she found them back in the 80s, they have been absolutely disappearing. In other words, they're so fragile, so friable, that they're breaking down. They even recovered them, and they're still breaking down. But when it was fresh, this is the way the foot looked. Now, if you're a human anatomist, this is distinctly human. Not just in shape, here are the features you can look for, but it's the way the foot hits the ground and we push off as we walk. Humans have a distinctive left-right stride. Their heel hits first, and then the force goes up along the outside of the foot to the little toe, across the base of the toes, and we push off with our big toe. Absolutely human. I had an opportunity to ask Mary Leakey at a reception after her presentation the following question. Since you concede that they're virtually identical to habitually unshod modern humans, why not at least consider the possibility that they're human? And in that tone of voice that the British use for colonists, she said, "Oh, but surely you must know there were no humans around." Well, it settles that. People ask me all the time, how come we don't find human fossils in old strata? Hey, how about this one? What happens when you do? They get disqualified. Either the strata isn't as old as they thought it was because you found human fossils there, or they say it's not human. How are you going to stay ahead of that one? By the way, those of you that still don't know how to tell ape feet from human feet, I thought I would throw this in. Another thing they talk about is Lucy's knee. I'll bet you've probably all heard about Lucy's knee at one time or another. This is the knee here, and the thing that's important is that, notice the femur comes down, and then this is the tibia, and if you were to run a line straight up from the tibia, notice that it would go up here because there's an angle here. That angle is called the carrying angle, or the valgus. And in humans, that's a 9-degree angle approximately, whereas you look at a gorilla, it's 0, chimp is 0. In other words, gorillas and chimps have straight legs. Humans are knock-kneed. Our femurs converge to our knees. You may think, bad idea, but it's a good idea. It keeps our feet together. You see, if our legs were straight, they'd be as far apart as our hips. So in women, they'd be, a little further yet because they have bigger hips for accommodating childbirth. And when you lift your left foot, you would tend to fall that way. And when you lift your right foot, you would fall this way. Now, you could prevent it. All you do is when you lift your right foot, throw your weight over the left. When you lift your left foot, throw your weight over the right. I will demonstrate. This is the way you walk. Ever see anything walk like this? Apes and academics, that's it. Those two. Now, I'm not picking on the academics. I can remember when I couldn't even spell academic, and now I are one. But anyway, apes, like gorillas and chimps, have straight legs. Humans have this 9-degree angle, and Lucy has a 15-degree angle. So evolutionists have used this to argue that, you see, Lucy was becoming adapted to walking. In fact, was indeed walking as we do, without having to throw the weight of the body from side to side in a perfectly good left-right stride, just the way someone would walk down the streets of Long Island or something like that, right? Now, what kind of questions should we be asking? What we should be asking is, well, that's interesting, but are there any living apes that have a high carrying angle? And absolutely. The orangutan has a 9-degree angle. The spider monkey has a 9-degree angle. What's the take-home lesson? A carrying angle does not necessarily mean a creature is becoming upright, walking on 2 legs. What are these animals doing with that carrying angle? They are walking on limbs in a tree like a tight wire walker. They have their arms up here and an upper limb. They're walking on the lower. And if I were to give instructions to a tight wire walker, I would say, try not to walk with your feet apart like this. Keep them together. So it's not evidence in itself that nobody believes the orangutan or spider monkey are on the verge of becoming human and doing ballet and things like that. And Stern and Sussman came to the same conclusions. That the overall structure of the knee is compatible with a significant amount of tree-like dwelling. Well, let's jump up to Discover magazine of 1996. I showed you the feet from that before. Absolutely human feet, though we know better now. But look at the hands. Is this not interesting? That's not what we saw in the mannequin in the St. Louis Zoo. These puppies are meat hooks. Highly curved fingers. That's what we want. That reflects the curvature that Stern and Sussman saw. But notice they didn't do it with the feet. They don't dare, because the feet must fit the Laetoli footprint. It's the best evidence we have that an ape-like creature walked just as we do. You know what it is? It's a problem just like the wicked stepsisters in the Cinderella story. They want to get those feet into that glass slipper, and they're going to try to get them into the glass slipper even though they don't fit. But they finally gave in on the hands. The other thing that's interesting is look at the hips. Those are what we call ape hips. What's the difference between ape hips and human hips? Here's chimp hips. The iliac blade, that's the bone that's under your belt here, goes from side to side. The iliac blades stick out like this on an ape. And on a human, they come forward. I kind of liken it to a steering yoke on an airplane. You got the shaft in the middle where the spinal column is, and you got the handles here. And so this is quite different from this, and this is important. Why? Because there's a muscle that goes from this bone down the outside of the leg to here, right in this area here, called the gluteus medius. It's under the gluteus maximus, which you're setting on now. The gluteus medius is, if anything, more important than the gluteus maximus, even though it's smaller. When you lift your left leg, your left hip should drop, because this is an articulation. Think of a doll that's just got a hinge there. And when you lift your right leg, your right hip should drop. It doesn't, because when you lift your right leg, the gluteus medius contracts, squeezes here and keeps this from happening. And when you lift your left leg, the right gluteus medius contracts, keeps it from falling. Apes have a gluteus medius too. It goes down the backside. And apes have a posture like this. Never mind the ape man like so. They have a posture like this. Their problem is falling on their face, and the gluteus medius helps to keep them from falling forward. What does an ape do when it walks then? Same thing as it does with the straight leg. Without the gluteus medius, has to throw the weight over the planted foot. You're back to the wobble again. Now here's your problem. They know Lucy made the Laetoli footprints. The Laetoli footprints are identical to modern man and have the same stride, but sadly the feet aren't the right shape to fit the footprints. To add insult to injury, the hips would not allow that kind of walking. What will the solution be? Well, in most fields of science, you'd say, a really bad speculation we've got here, let's bag it and move on to something else. But in evolution, there are other solutions. Notice Stern and Sussman said, the marked resemblance of Lucy's hip to the chimp is equally obvious. So this pelvis is like a chimp. Just a few years ago on television, the PBS Nova series, they had Dr. Owen Lovejoy on, who's a famous human evolutionist, and he was lamenting the fact that Lucy has ape hips, and that with ape hips, she couldn't walk like a human, but we know she did. So what's the solution? You are not going to believe what you're about to see. What you're about to see is science. Get it started here.
The ape that stood up, it was a revolutionary idea. We needed Owen Lovejoy's expertise again, because the evidence wasn't quite adding up. The knee looked human, but the shape of her hip didn't. Superficially, her hip resembled a chimpanzee's, which meant that Lucy couldn't possibly have walked like a modern human. But Lovejoy noticed something odd about the way the bones had been fossilized.
When I put the two parts of the pelvis together that we had, this part of the pelvis has pressed so hard and so completely into this one that it caused it to be broken into a series of individual pieces which were then fused together in later fossilization.
So you get the picture? It was originally, according to him, shaped exactly like a human pelvis, but something happened to it that like maybe squashed it, so it was like this, but once it got squashed, it looked like a human pelvis. And according to the PBS series, they know who squashed it. Deer. I mean, I don't know about you, but I think the deer are taking over. We got to stop them. I mean, they're running into cars. They're stepping on our most priceless fossils. Here is the deer foot actually stomping Lucy's hips. Now, I have to tell you what you're going to hear, because you're not going to believe it when you hear it. I just want to get you ready for this. Lovejoy is going to hold up this fossil of hip bones, and he's going to say the following. These bones fit together so well, they're in an anatomically impossible position. That would be like you going into a body shop and somebody telling you, you know, your front right fender fits on your car so well, it's not possible. And he has a solution that I think you will agree it no longer fits well when he's done.
This has caused the two bones, in fact, to fit together so well that they're in an anatomically impossible position.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bones seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost.
Yeah, that would be a buzzsaw or a Dremel tool.
Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly,
it fit
like
real
a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
What can you say? This is science. You can teach this in a public school. You just can't criticize it. That would be religion. Oh, things have gotten worse for Lucy. I hate to even bring this up, but just a couple of months ago, April of 2007, in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, yet another Lucy-type specimen has been discovered, Australopithecus afarensis. It's an almost perfect mandible with intact teeth, and it turns out it's a dead ringer for a gorilla, or very similar to a gorilla, very much unlike man or even a chimp. Their conclusion, this casts doubt on the role of Australopithecus afarensis as a modern human ancestor. Come full circle, huh? Well, let's let some evolutionists have a word here. This is David Pilbeam, very distinguished paleoanthropologist, and he had just reviewed a book on human evolution by Richard Leakey, in which Richard Leakey basically says, we're going to have to forget everything we ever thought we knew about human evolution. I found some fossils here that throw everything into a cocked hat. His reward for that was to be booted out of the whole field of human evolution. He no longer works in it. He's in politics now. He's an outcast. His wife, Meeb, still works in it, but not him. And this is what Pilbeam said after reading Leakey's book. My reservations concern not so much this book, but the whole subject of paleoanthropology. But introductory books or book reviews are hardly the place to argue that perhaps generations of students of human evolution, including myself, have been flailing about in the dark, that our database is too sparse, too slippery, for it to be able to mold our theories. Rather, the theories are more statements about us and ideology than about the past. Paleoanthropology reveals more about how humans view themselves than it does about how humans came about, but that is heresy. Can you imagine that? My friends, the reason this is all important is because if God created us in His image, then we are the people of His pasture, as Psalm 100 said. It is God that sets the absolutes. He sets the rules. He tells us how He would have us live, and above all has come to save us through His Son Jesus from sin and death and the power of the devil. He did not come to save apes or animals. But if you have ape in your past, your morality is relative. And isn't that what Satan told Eve? If you eat of the fruit of this tree, you shall become as gods, knowing right from wrong or good from evil. You can decide for yourself. It's man that sets the rules. And when people start setting their own rules, it can get a little scary. I was watching a program on TV a few years ago. There was a handsome young man, went to the University of Wisconsin, had this wonderful Wisconsin accent that I've always gotten a kick out of. He was very articulate, very bright, very with it, very collected. He's the kind of person I would think any lady watching would say, oh, I wish my daughter could find someone like him to marry one day. One little problem. We're talking about Jeffrey Dahmer. This perfectly coherent, perfectly intelligent, attractive, bright guy said the following on the Stone Phillips show. If a person doesn't think there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway. I always believed the theory of evolution is truth, that we all just came from the slime. And when we died, you know, that was it, nothing. It makes a big difference, friends, whether we began as a primitive being and over millions of years of bloodshed, suffering, and disease worked our way up by random chance and natural selection to man, or whether in fact we were created with initial perfection and would have lived forever, and with the fall into sin, it's in fact been a downhill slide, not an uphill ascent.